My name is Wendy Johnson. I'm a farmer in Floyd County, central northeast Iowa, and I'm going to talk about how we've built our farm for shepherding. Now, I'm going to give you the disclaimer that, like any PFI spiel that you'll hear from a PFI member, I'm not an expert. This is just sharing my story and the way that we have gone about it. We've made lots of mistakes. We're still making mistakes. So take this information as not as a book, but take it as just sharing what has worked and what hasn't worked for us. So just a little bit of background. I tried to sum up kind of how I came to what it is that I do all in one slide, so I wouldn't spend too much time on it. But basically, I grew up on a hog farm in the early 80s, and my parents were some of the first that put together, not put together, they built a CAFO in Floyd County, and we raised hogs in these buildings, and I grew up on a corn and soybean farm. I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. I wasn't interested in agriculture because of I wasn't interested in food production because I didn't see actual food production. I saw a lot of things being exported off our farm and nothing ever really coming in. So, and agriculture in the 80s was not something that was like, oh, I really want to become a farmer at that time during the farm crisis. So I did something completely different. I moved to Los Angeles, and that's where I started going to farmers markets. Visited my very first farmers market in Santa Monica, California. Went to all sorts of different farmers markets. Whether they were the actual farmers or not is a question mark, but still, I got to see products that were being grown in parts of the country that I hadn't before, and I got to see a farmer to products and learned, hey, there can be a face to food. And then with some experiences overseas, I finally decided to come back to Iowa in 2010. And that's my dad and I in that photograph. And I had to start from very basic level of learning about basic agronomy of growing corn and soybeans. So I grew up on a corn and soybean farm. I had to learn about how to grow corn and soybeans. And I learned about chemical agriculture in that way. And then I started to, I was very interested in non-chemical agriculture or organic agriculture. And so I learned about organic agriculture and what it took to grow corn and soybeans in an organic way. And learned that I had to do this, plow. And so I learned how to plow, which is a skill that I don't really want to have to learn again. And then with that kind of knowledge about a corn system, being in a corn and soybean system, I wanted to really capture more of that dollar. I wanted to be a farmer that grew food for people. And so I developed Joya Food Farm, which is now Joya Food and Fiber Farm. And we grow and raise food for our regional and our local communities. And we also ship to the upper Midwest. And so it's almost like I went full circle. I'm not holding a pig anymore, though I do raise some pigs, but I'm holding a sheep. And I hold the sheep here because I feel like sheep and ruminants in general are just wonderful renovators for landscapes, especially ones that are healing from an intensive corn and soybean system. So a little bit about our crop rotation, and all of this, just remember, it's a story. So it's gonna, at the end, hopefully you'll understand that the reasons why and how we became what we are today is because of some of these practices. So I was very interested in non-chemical agriculture. I learned about organic systems, and this is an average crop system that we utilize for transitioning to organic and becoming organic. So we start with an oats underseeded with pasture forages. We have pasture and hay for a few years, though I have to admit the first few years my very first crop rotation, it was only alfalfa. I didn't even think about putting livestock on the land because I was in this very extractive mode and mindset that I needed to just produce. We're very flat here. We're not part of the driftless. And so it's corn and soybeans all around us. And so I was still in this mindset of corn and soybeans, and to get to that certified crop of organic corn, because that is what was going to pay for all my other years of transition. And it's organic corn, or corn in general, that pays for the majority of your cropping system. And so then soybeans after. Some people do soybeans and then corn after they come out of pasture and hay. And I do corn and then soybeans. But what I noticed is that for that alfalfa field, I was not, I didn't integrate livestock, because this is how I was taught how to raise livestock. And if you look at these forages, if anybody who knows forages here are interested in it, that's not healthy forage that they're on. And so I also didn't have the right genetics for a grass-fed kind of system. And so I was still learning. And this is how I was taught to raise sheep. You put them in the creek area, and they just eat that up all during the growing season. You wean the lambs, you put the lambs in a feedlot, and you feed out the lambs, and then you send the lambs to the auction. And so that's what I was taught to do, but I saw lots of flaws in that system, and I wanted to do something different. So we launched Joy Food Farm in the fall of 2014, and with basically using whole and half pig sales as kind of our very first enterprise. And just like my parents did when they had hogs, hogs carry the farm, to be honest. And they did. It's so true with ours. Everyone seems to love pork. They're easy to sell, wholes and halves. And it was really my foray into direct market sales. In 2015, then we added pastured chickens, eggs, and then lamb. And all meanwhile, we're learning about how to grow this kind of food in a very natural way, so that we could connect with our consumer. And in 2015, we started with farmers markets and wholesale to restaurants and retailers. That's how we started the business. And then we moved to online sales and buying clubs in 2018. Now at this time, we only had like 20 sheep, 20 ewes, and I was really recreating. I was helping change the genetics, and so I'm working through the genetics, and that takes a little bit of time. So we became animal welfare approved, which helped us set ourselves apart from our competition, I guess, in terms of being at the farmers market and getting consumer awareness around animal welfare. And so I'd have this beautiful pasture where I'd start, I'd be grazing for 2 years or so, and then I had to do what's on the right. And it eats me up. It ate me up every time. I don't do it anymore, but it's not a healthy practice to do. And so that helped my decision making a little bit. Plus, there's no market for transition or organic oats or alfalfa. So instead, I was really extracting all those nutrients, and then I had to purchase nutrients and put it back in the field to plant organic corn, which is the prize, right? The prize in a system that is like a 5 to 7 year crop rotation. And I didn't really like doing that either. So I felt like I was being trapped in how I should farm and the way that I should farm in a way that wasn't healthy also for the land. And meanwhile, this is an old photograph of our farm. This is the field that I transitioned first. I live on a 130-acre farm, but I started transitioning very slowly. So this field is 25 or 27 acres. I put some in CRP. You can notice the sheep are in the riparian area in the creek. That's where they spent the entire summer while I'm growing corn in a field that has a waterway. It has a waterway in between a creek, and so you can see what might happen when it rains for many days and the soil is saturated. And this is what happened. So we had flooding events in 2016 and in 2018, and you can see my row crop corn on the lower left there. The creek turns into a river. I had our sheep out there. I had to bring, chase them all back in. I had no idea that the creek would do this. I was fairly new to this area. I mean, this was my grandparents' farm, but I'd never seen this happen before, like this much water happen before. And so it was a new experience. There's some chicken tractors floating in there. We lost some chickens. I had no idea the water was going to rise so quickly, and that I was actually going to deal with a river. And so that was a great learning experience. We also had liver flukes and things like that because it was so wet that year, that we had a lot of illness with our sheep when we put the sheep back out in that area. And this is I don't know if this will play, but this is the field, my cornfield at harvest. And we had another rain event. This is my organic corn. This is the waterway that just the soils were saturated. There's cornfields all around me. And this is what I witnessed for the very first time. I'd never seen water like this happen in Iowa before, even growing up. And so it did follow through the waterway, but it went into the corn, and on the other end of the field, it flooded the corn as well. Surprisingly, I had a great corn crop and corn yield. So that was amazing. But in 2018, it happened again. So I think I had soybeans or corn on another field here, and some soybeans, and it flooded again. Another piece of equipment floated down the creek there. And so I'm learning about what the land is telling me and how things are changing on our landscape. And I'm figuring out that this field shouldn't be in corn and soybeans anymore. So the next rotation, I went back, after the soybeans, I went back to, instead of just planting pure alfalfa, I decided to plant a hay and grass, like a pasture species. So it was like a 12 to 14 diverse pasture mix. And we started learning about rotational grazing. We pulled the sheep off the creek pasture, the riparian area, and we started to raise our small flock. And we bought our first cow, I think, that year. And we had a llama, we had some goats, we mixed them all together, and we started rotational grazing, trying to figure out sizes of paddocks and learning about how to rotationally graze. There wasn't as many resources out there as there are today about learning how to rotationally graze, except for like maybe out west or something. So that was a really great learning experience. And we had happy animals, animals that were flourishing, that were healthy. Their eyes looked different, they're healthier, they're bright, their coats, their hair on the wool, the hair on the cattle, the wool on the sheep, it just was healthier. And we started to learn that we didn't have to deworm anymore. I mean, what we used to have to do is try to deworm like 2 to 3 times a season. And now we use a FOMACHA scoring system. We look at their eyelids, and we only treat those who need it. And that's usually, I think, in the last 5 years, we've treated just a handful of sheep for worms or for parasites. And that's huge, because that means that we have tools in those parasitic, anti-parasitic tools still work. And that's how it should be. Here's another field. This is the kind of flooding that we get in our part of the state. We're near creeks, different creeks. This is another field. It was a cornfield again. And we're more often than none seeing higher winds. This was not a derecho. This was part of three different tornadoes that touched down in like a 10-mile radius. I think it touched down on several different fields that I had to harvest. Harvesting this corn is not fun. It's very challenging, and I think I broke broke 2 snouts that year. And another learning lesson, how to harvest down corn. So with these kinds of different things, I'm learning that corn is also just, it's a very vulnerable um, plant. And we grow so much of it, but it's also, and I'll talk about this a little later, it's highly protected. So meanwhile, we're also seeing dust storms like this. This was in South Dakota. We're seeing more and more high heat events, dry weather that are causing some of some of these dust storms. This was in May of, I think, 2022. And every winter, it seems for the last 4 or 5, because it's been so dry, we have started to see a lot of soil move. And so this is my neighbor's field. The soil from across the road ended up across the road into this field. And we see a lot more soil movement, which is all another reason why I've decided, just through observation, that I needed to protect the land better in a place that is predominantly corn and soybeans. So just want to give you a difference here of how we've kind of grown and changed. So in 2015, you see those sheep and that kind of pasture. And this is the same pasture, the same place. The forage looks different. It's still healing, but it's getting better. We have different genetics of sheep and we have different management strategies. And that's in 6 years. So as we started to develop our, okay, I'm taking the corn out of the equation. How am I going to make money, right? How am I going to, I need a higher price for my products, and I want to grow our sheep flock because I want to use them. I saw how great they are at regenerating land, that I wanted to do it on a larger scale. So we started increasing our flock size. And with that, I then certified our sheep and lamb as grass-fed. And these are the certifications that we hold, certified grass-fed and animal welfare approved. We were certified non-GMO for label purposes, but our customers really didn't, they kind of knew through our storytelling and things that we were grass-fed and we didn't use chemicals. And so because they're grass-fed, they would be non-GMO. So we had to pay a hefty price for that label. And so we took that off eventually and saw no loss in terms of sales because we took that off. And so we started with 20 ewes. We began to grow the flock in 2017. But we did that only when we knew we had this committed, stable grass-fed market that pays us a premium. And they discovered us through our AGW, our Greener World Animal Welfare Approved status, our certification. And they came to us and approached us and had a very reasonable contract for raising lambs for that market. And so we've been with them since then, since 2017. And the one stipulation with certifications is, well, depending on the certification, they have certain stipulations. And one is with AWA, they prohibit the regular sales to livestock auctions. So it needs to either go to direct to consumer or to wholesale market, which is what we were fulfilling. And that has worked. It's worked. But we can always fall back on auctions, but then we would not be able to, depending on how many animals went to auction, we would not be able to certify anymore. But at that point, if we were having to do that, then there's no point of having the AWA certification anyway. So today we have about 115 ewes, and they start to lamb in April. We're going to be shearing here actually tomorrow, we're going to start shearing. And we graze and hay on about 60 acres of cool season forage, and we graze and hay on 45 acres of kernza. Oops, sorry. We also started adding value to our our farm by adding, every year we were taking off this beautiful wool that could be used for something. And really what we were doing was just trading it with the shear. And every year we were shearing, the price of wool kept going down, down, down. I think we started at 10 cents a pound and now it's at around 2.5 cents a pound. So it just was, there had to be more value to this really great fiber. And so in 2020, I started a business called Counting Sheep Sleep Company. And we have wool-filled, we make and sell wool-filled pillows, mattress toppers, comforters, eye masks. We're getting into pet beds, potentially, and some other travel pillows and such. And we don't sew the mattress toppers and the comforters in-house. We use a fiber mill in southern Minnesota. So on 130 acres, we now are a regenerative organic farm. So we're certified organic. The Kernza is in transition right now. And we have more forage than we can feed at the right time. And so we started to add cattle, other people's cattle, and custom grazed cattle in the early months of the grazing season to try to keep ahead of the forage. My personal problem is that I like having the cows there so much, they do such great work, that sometimes I have trouble letting them go. And so like last year, we dealt with a drought. I should have let them go home probably in June, but I didn't. And so, and I'm hoping that our pastures didn't suffer too much from a little bit of overgrazing. So we have 45 acres of Kernza. We graze and harvest that for grain. If you haven't heard of Kernza before, it's a perennial grain. It was actually a forage first and foremost. Then you can graze it in the spring. You can harvest it in the late summer, and then you can graze it again in the fall. And we also have some native seed plantings on the farm with which can offer some potential grazing opportunities if your county goes into a D3 drought in Iowa. So the Kernza really saved us in September, in October, actually October specifically. We had the cows in the Kernza after we took off the Kernza grain the end of August. It really started, it was greening up already. It was ready to be grazed. And we put the custom grazed cattle out there just to figure out and see if they liked it. And then they went home later in that month, and then we put the sheep out there and just to see, how are the sheep grazing it? What are they doing? Do they like it? And they liked it. And so it really saved us from buying hay early. We were able to graze that in October and November. And so it saved us about $6,600 from buying hay just for the sheep. I don't buy hay for the cattle. I sent the cattle home. We've planted more than 6,000 trees in the last 5 years on the farm, mostly around the riparian buffer. So that really scraggly area that the sheep were in is this area on the left. It's very bromy and has fescue. And so we wanted to really restore that riparian buffer. And so we started planting trees 5 years ago and adding more trees to it. We also planted a silvopasture and then a micro orchard, and then enhanced some windbreaks. This is a picture of our, on the left is our silvopasture. We hay in between the rows currently until the trees are about 3 to 5 years old. And then on the right is a picture of our riparian area buffers. And I'm hoping that one day we can flash graze this area because it needs some impact. Right now we're heavily mowing and there's quite a bit of forage out there. It was my mistake to plant trees sequentially in a year, years versus just planting all the trees all at once. Because if I did, I might have trees as tall as the tallest ones there in that photograph and not have the small ones. And so it's more difficult to graze out there when you have trees of all different sizes. And so, like, woulda, shoulda, coulda. That's another mistake I made. I should have just invested and planted all the trees at once in that area so then I could utilize that by now. But I can't predict the weather either. So, and this is just hay that uh, I'd raked up that we're harvesting between the tree rows in the silvopasture. And now we're looking at certifying regenerative. We received a grant from RAFI to apply for certified regenerative. These certifications are expensive. The ROC, certified regenerative with AGW. There's I want to say the holistic management organization, they have a regenerative label too. There's just so many. They're expensive though, because it takes a lot of time to write them and it's a whole system kind of certification. But we feel like we're getting an opportunity to do this for free, and so we should take it up. And so that's our next step here. And so here's some other things of what's next for us, to grow 60-inch corn with a 14 species cover crop mix to graze this fall. So I should give you the background that I also co-manage about 1,000-acre farm with my family, my dad specifically. And so one of my goals is to one, I'd love to put 3 crops in a crop rotation, but that's not going to happen yet. And so I'm starting with growing 60-inch corn and integrating livestock that way with a 14 species cover crop mix. This is on a 40-acre field. I hope to have a field day later this year to showcase that along with the grazing capabilities in that field. I'm going to build 2 more mobile shade water units. I created or designed some mobile shade units that are a lot less expensive than a shade haven. And so we have 2 right now. We're building 2 more, so we'll have 4. I am purchasing a dual meat wool breed ram. I'm going to cross with just a subset of ewe lambs in May to see if we can do some out of season breeding. And I'm working with the University of Kansas on an agrivoltaics genetics study of variety or species and hybrids of sheep that do well under agrivoltaics. And I want to start marketing in our mobile custom grazing services to help other landowners achieve their goals, especially with this whole carbon market getting online and more conventional corn and soybean growers interested in integrating livestock. So this is just a really neat picture graph of some of the benefits of regenerative grazing. And you can see that so from nutrient soil retention to flood regulation to rural community health to farm financial resilience, there's just a lot of benefits, co-benefits to adding livestock on the land. See. And so by transforming our 130 acres from corn and soybeans to a grass and forage mix, we plugged in some numbers to know what we're doing carbon wise, just out of curiosity. And so in Comet Farm, you can really plug in whatever it is that you want to see what it is you're saving. But I put in gas-powered cars, so I'm saving 7.7 million miles driven by gas-powered cars over 20 years. And so farmers and landowners can use this tool to then discover, what they're saving in terms of carbon and what they're capturing. And I think it's very helpful because I think the future of agriculture is going to be all about carbon. Fortunately or unfortunately. And so I want to be on top of that. So early on, I looked into carbon markets and realized that, and maybe this is going to be changing, I think it will be soon, but right now carbon markets are really set up for large acreages and for those practices that are transitioning now, not, you did no-till before, or you transitioned to hay like 5 years ago. It's all about the change right now. And so I didn't see that it was really set up to help pay for carbon sequestered for small acreages or those that are preserving or planting forests or grasslands. But I think there's more to be discovered there, and there is a movement about. So I'd stay on top of it in terms of the value that you're creating with perennializing the landscape. And just Iowa as well as I do, where our property values are based on CSR, corn suitability ratings. I'm in Floyd County, so our corn suitable rating right now is around 79.5 or 80. So the lighter the color here, the higher the CSR. So that means the higher the property value. And we're seeing that land values are increasing because of corn production, and because it's all based on corn suitability rating and soil type. And in 21-22, property values increased by 17%, which is one of the largest jumps in a while, making it even more difficult for farms like mine to be profitable when we're trying to rotate out of corn and soybeans and into perennials. And last year, our property values went up about the state average, sorry, went up about $400 on average. So I put there's a lot of numbers that go back into this graph, but I didn't want to put a whole bunch of numbers and get everyone confused. So this is very basic, but I compared our 2022 crop versus grazing returns on owned land to our 2023 crop versus grazing returns on owned land. And so my income, what I want to really show here is that in 2022 and 2023, there was a big difference in terms of income. Conventional corn and soybeans prices were higher in 2022. I had really some of the same markets as I did. But this year in 2023, I sold some breeding stock. So that helped my net income increase a bit. And crop prices went down in 2023. So corn prices went down. So actually, I was about even in terms of my net income per acre with conventional corn and soybeans. But what I want to disclaim is that it's not where conventional corn and soybeans is more predictable. It's more risky and less predictable in a perennial grazing system. And again, here's some government program payments when I compare our conventional farm to our perennial farm. On a per acre basis, it actually comes about to be the same. But what I want you to look at are the costs. So I didn't have really any costs on the conventional farm system except for some mowing and some prairie seed drilling for some of the government payments that we received. But on the perennial farm, I had a lot of expenses, and because you're building something that is very new and different, and the infrastructure, so I'm setting up the infrastructure, and there's a lot of investment in that. So that's what I've spent because I've had to kind of recreate a system, or it's just new to this, new to what it was, a corn and soybean system. And so this is what might deter people from turning their farms into perennial farms, for example, the costs, the infrastructure costs and the capital needed to build these kinds of systems when property values are so high here in Iowa. But I don't want to deter you from that. And I hope that I want to bring actually hope and inspiration to continue or to do advocate for more perennial systems. So our row crop versus grazing, for example, our income on the conventional side, on the corn soybean side is very steady, but the perennial grazing side is highly variable. Like I said, we sold some breeding stock for which gave us a higher premium. We direct marketed every single lamb to to buyers. And so our income was higher, but that doesn't happen every single year. And with livestock, you just never know what you're going to get. And the prices are very variable, and they're unprotected. The expenses on the corn side, they're variable, whereas in the grazing, those are pretty steady. But on a corn soybean system, they're price protected. And in the perennial system, there is no price protection. And I'm really interested in, I get really fired up about policy. And so these are some of the things that I'm really advocating for, is that we need more of these opportunities. It should be a level playing field, right? Not just one-sided, which it feels like it's very one-sided. And so we don't have crop insurance. We don't really need it. And we're not part of a farm program. And we have conservation cost share, but it's available to us, but really it only helps with infrastructure, not with maintenance, not with practice, not with, and that's starting to change with the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of these dollars are being focused more towards perennial practices, but it's still, and you have to pull along your NRCS a little bit to help them understand. But they're willing to work with us. But the conservation cost share for corn, for example, it's there. Cover crops, sure. No-till, yeah. Crop rotation, yeah. And those dollar amounts are pretty high. And so that's another incentive to keep on with the same system. But that system doesn't really offer a lot of ecosystem services. And what I really want to press upon all of you is that perennial grazing and grazing, really, we are providing ecosystem services to a T, but currently they don't have a lot of value. But I'm optimistic that that's changing, especially with carbon markets and with Inflation Reduction Act dollars. So our risk level on one side is very low for corn production, but for perennial grazing, it's very high because of that high variability. So we have something called a Farm Bill that you all know of that's coming up here. And I always like to plug the Farm Bill because it's such an instrumental piece of legislation that is really going to project what we do and what we practice for the next 5 years. Our Farm Bill is delayed, potentially by 2 years. We still have an opportunity to really voice our concerns about what we want to see on the landscape, how we want to see things practiced, what we want to protect. And right now, the Inflation Reduction Act dollars are at risk of being sucked into commodities and crop insurance and expanding those titles within the Farm Bill and reducing conservation dollars. So I really want to stress to all of you that that you advocate for what it is that if you want to see more people on the land, if you want to see more, I'd love to see more perennials. If you want to see more perennials on the land and people grazing Iowa, we need to make our voices heard. And so what do we want our Farm Bill to do for us? Do we want a Band-Aid Farm Bill, or do we want a preventative Farm Bill? And I personally would love to invest our tax dollars in prevention. And so they require less fossil fuel. They're continuous living cover. You're all grazers. I'm assuming you all know all the benefits that you provide for your area, your water, your land, and the soil. You're protecting that soil, and you're benefiting your rural communities and economies because you're spending a lot of those dollars for fencing materials and some local labor, and you're probably the best customer at your local farm store, for example. Those are things that are helping build your rural communities, and we're reducing GHG emissions. And I have to say, from my perspective, as a farmer, as a conservation farmer, I've built our farm business based on conservation. And I'm a new farmer. I'm still considered a beginning farmer, I think, for 1 more year. But we've built our businesses based on conservation. And so I can say that conservation builds and grows new farmers and gives opportunities to new farmers. Whereas a lot of people aren't just going to go buy a $500,000 combine and start combining custom combining corn and soybeans, for example, or creating businesses around corn and soybeans. So, but the caveat is that preventative methods like conservation are not protected, and they're risky, and they're not the norm. And a band-aid solution is the status quo is protected and it's de-risked and it is the norm. So I want to see more of this. I want to see connection. I want to see connection to the land. I want to see more people on the land. I truly and honestly think that livestock is one of the best ways to build connection, from people to the land, people to animals, people to food, and to grow local rural communities and economies. And I can't do all this work by myself. The way that we've built our farm, it takes a community, it takes a village. And so these are all the different groups that we've worked with. I'm missing a few on here as well, but they're all the different groups that have been really helpful in helping us build a community that of stewardship. So I want to thank you for your time, and I will take questions. These are some of my contact information. But I'm going to keep this slide up if I can, Amos, if we can keep this slide up. This is a QR code because I want to know, I'm working with Greenland's Blue Waters and some other organizations that want to know how to help you make the best decisions on perennial production options that are going to be profitable. And if that's a tool, that's a tool. But I hope that you will click on this, take a picture of this QR code, click on that link. It's 2 or 3 questions. We'd love to know, because we'd like to, with this information, we can help build out a tool, hopefully that can help with the decision making for people that are looking at grazing or building their own shepherding farm. All right.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy.
That slide came out, but sorry.
No, that's fine. A perfect time for me to say or mention something I missed in the beginning, which is that this presentation and all of the webinars from this year will be archived and available on the PFI website and on our YouTube channel. So for folks who missed taking a photo of that QR code, come back in a few days and you can find it again. All right, so a reminder, I invite folks to hop in the chat, ask your questions, but to kick things off, Wendy, I've got one here for you. From your talk, it seems like one of the big focuses of why you're doing a lot of this stuff is the benefits it has to the land and the ecosystem services. When you're marketing your lamb or your wool or anything, are your customers interested in that aspect of it, or what attracts them to your products?
Absolutely. So storytelling is a huge piece of marketing, as you all know. Maybe you market your own meats or things, but that story is important. And I talk about that a lot. I talk about land use, observing the land, the things that we're up against in terms of how to transition land, broken land into healed land, one that's going to supply more food for people and build community. And that's the story. Those are the stories that I tell, and it connects with people. And and it connects with companies too, like our welfare certifications and our grass-fed certifications. They want to hear those stories as well to share to their customers. So I guess I want to really stress that it's not just about grazing some animals. It's much more than that. And I'd really like to emphasize to everybody listening that has a business or a farm business that it's much more beyond your fence lines and your property lines. This kind of, I'd say, shepherding and building a farm based on raising ruminants and perennials. It's outside your boundaries, and embrace that. It's a big piece of it, and telling that story and why it's important to you, why you love Iowa, why, those are really important elements.
A question from the chat from Carl. Would you share a bit more about grazing and photovoltaics? Do the owners of the field or solar panels pay you to graze your sheep? How do you bring in water for your sheep, etc.? How do you find owners to do that?
So just as a disclaimer, I don't have agrivoltaics and we don't graze under agrivoltaics right now. I'm working on a genetic component for a larger project, 1,000 to 1,200 acre solar farm in outside of Douglas County in Kansas. And I'm not physically there, but I have a friend who is my, I guess, sort of coworker peer. She's working in it and on it. And it's a process. It is a process from state policy to city policy and creating agrivoltaic plans around that. So it's much more complicated. Now in Iowa right now, we have some of these smaller grazing, smaller solar farms, and they were built before even agrivoltaics was a piece of the conversation. And so what we're doing, what we're doing, and this organization is doing in Kansas is getting on board right away before those panels are even placed on farms and creating the agrivoltaic system plan so that there is even capability to graze under those solar panels. In terms of uh, I can't really get into the weeds about like how do you bring water to the sheep in those systems. That's all still in development. Again, like I don't graze sheep under solar right now.
Another question from the chat, this one from Kathy. Thank you for your presentation, Wendy. When you direct market your lambs, what price are you getting? How does it break down as live weight, like what you get paid at a sale barn?
Okay, so we are getting for our direct market lambs, we charge $8.99 a pound, and that's about average. That doesn't include processing, so processing is around $80 to $100 a lamb, and so our consumers, our customers, they pay that per pound price and the processing. Now with lamb, because lamb is there's a lot of people who don't know about lamb, and I really had to do a lot of marketing around lamb to get people to even try it, to taste it. But those who do like it, they love it, and they like the grass-fed meat versus a corn-fed lamb, and they like the story. So in terms of pricing for like that's for direct consumer. So $8.99 a pound, that's carcass weight. So a live lamb our live lambs, they finish at about 120 pounds, and they're about a 60 to 65 pound carcass. Yes, I hope that answers your question. And hi, Kathy.
Another question, which is you mentioned you spoke a little earlier about your certifications, and you mentioned dropping your certified non-GMO certification, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. But you have kept another, and you're going to be adding the regenerative certification. Why? I guess you said your customers didn't care about the non-GMO one because they knew your story and knew what you guys were doing. Why do you feel that the other two certifications are required, or what benefits do they have?
Well, one, our wholesale buyer, they found us through AWA, through a greener world, and they were looking specifically for certified grass-fed. So that's kind of our niche in that market to achieve that premium. That's why we kept those. They didn't require the non-GMO. Now they aren't requiring certified regenerative. We're just interested in that certification one because it's going to be free for us, and we think that it will give us a greener world helps with marketing of the products. So they've opened up because we're animal welfare approved, they opened us up and connected us with animal ASPCA, which is the animal welfare uh, program. And so we get customers that are ASPCA members, and they come to us and they purchase food from us. So these certifications have really opened up markets, potential markets for us that we never would have had if we just are state that we're grass fed and state out loud that we're non-GMO or we're animal welfare approved. These actual certifications matter because people they want to share that. They carry that as a wholesale. They want to share that with other customers and organizations and promote. And we think that the regenerative certifications are going to do the same.
Another question from the chat, this one from Troy. Are you able to share details on your mobile shade and water solution? And also, how do you feed and water over the winter?
Yeah, I apologize for not putting a picture of my shade mobile on this webinar. I apologize. But I am very open to sharing our model. We use a local welder to create it. It's like an umbrella. It looks it's the same diameter as the Shade Haven, except it has a water tank, a 250-gallon water tank, sometimes 2 water tanks on a running gear. And then we carry around a float, a tub and a float where we bring, that water flows through. And then we have the shade that we use 80%, it's called an 80% shade, meaning it has holes in it so wind can flow through it. And we do put it together every spring and take it apart every fall. So there is a little bit of more maintenance or more labor, I guess, to doing it, but we can put these together for about $3,500 to $4,000 versus $15,000 that a Shade Haven would be. Plus, it provides a place for mineral and salt, your cafeteria style mineral, as well as your some water. We do have some water lines throughout our pastures too, and I've held field days on those, but we do have some less expensive infrastructure where we put above ground water lines to access water at different points. So we have tubs in paddocks as well that we put up with floats to plug into our water system. And we're expanding that water line system into another part of the farm. But we're based off of one well, and it makes me a little nervous about use of water in times when our groundwater is not being added to, but instead extracted all the time. So we're navigating through that. And then feed and water over the winter. Like I said, the custom cows go home. The lambs are all sold by then. And the ewes are on a dry feed bale graze. We bale graze system, and then they have one water access point.
Thank you. We are nearing 1 o'clock here, so any final questions, toss them in the chat now. Wendy, could you speak to the forage makeup of your pastures now that they are in the process of rehabilitating themselves?
Yeah, I think I used a Albert Lee seed mix, and then I kept adding more seeds to it later. But it's basically a 5 or 6 way grass mix. I can't remember all the varieties like Fessolium, Meadow Fescue, Annual Ryegrass, Timothy. There's some other grass, cool season forages basically, and then some clover and alfalfa, different varieties of clover and alfalfa. And then we've also added chicory. Chicory is great to interseed pastures in. It's also great for sheep rumens. They really like it. And we've interseeded millet. When it's dry, we interseed millet, pearl and Japanese millet, and that seems to work really well. If you hit a rain, you can interseed that pretty successfully. And then we're starting our native seed project here in the next year to add native seed warm season perennials, so that when those cool seasons cool down, or kind of go dormant. We have those annuals. I'm sorry, those warm season perennials to rely on. Right now we have the Kernza, which is really helpful um, as well. And this year we're considering not taking the Kernza for grain and actually using it for forage the entire season, just so we have enough forage, um, and maybe make some hay out of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Wendy. Well, it's 1 o'clock, and seeing no other questions in the chat, I'll thank you all for attending and invite you back for next week and the other upcoming webinars. So thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.